Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this week's episode, we're going to go through the steps that we took to get our Espar D2 Diesel heater installed. Just like most other van conversions, we chose to put our heater underneath the passenger seat in our van for a couple of reasons. One, the space allows for the heater to mount perfectly inside the enclosure there. It's just enough room to get the air duct to bend back around, and there's a place under the van that's the perfect size to get the heater to bolt up and have the exhaust and intake for the combustion ports underneath the van. Also, our discharge for the heat fits perfectly on the back of the seat here. And all that was drilling a hole with a hole saw and mounting the little duct there. There's also a little bit of wiring that we did. It's kind of hard to see in there right now because a lot of it's blacked out. But basically the fuel pump wiring we ran down through here, and it goes underneath the seat. It goes all the way under through the driver's seat. So underneath the driver's seat there's a boot wrapped around this big chunk of wire that basically passes through the floor and allows you to get down to the bottom of the van. So that's where we ran our fuel pump wiring, and that's all underneath the driver's seat on the van. And the fuel pump is actually located almost directly under the driver's seat. The next thing that we had to do was mount the wiring for the controls of the heater. And so in the heater wiring harness, there's two other main trunks, one for power and the other one for the thermostat. And so on a T1N Sprinter, like ours here, there is a pass-through. You can kind of see in here, there's a battery cable and then there's two other cables in there. And you have to actually remove this step, which is 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3, that you just pop the plastic piece out, unscrew the bolt, and then this comes out. And what you can do is then take the wires, run them behind here, around here, and then up through the panel that's hiding the seat belts and all the other stuff that's in the basically the B pillar of the van. And so I took a fish tape and fished it down through that column there, and then here's the two wires that are running to the back of the van. And you can see I did not have enough wire in the kit, so I'm going to have to extend the wires. This one's actually even shorter here. That's the power wire setup. So I'll extend the wires and run them back to where our batteries are going to be and our electrical controls, which is right on top of the wheel weld there. So, taking a quick look under the van here, this is the bottom side of the van. Basically the wheel is in front of us, as you can see there. And we're right in this little channel right between the frame rail. I guess it's not really a frame rail, it's just the unibody frame and the door step. And that's where the heater penetrations are all coming through the van. So we've got the silver hose here, which is our exhaust. We've got the black hose up here, which is our intake for the combustion air. And then we've got our fuel line that is clipped to the frame here, and it runs up and over the exhaust above our little heat shield in here and goes all the way over to the other side. So over here on the other side of the van, we've got the fuel pump, and it is mounted in a place where there was a hole already in the frame rail, and we took it and basically used one M10 bolt with a nut and bolted it to the frame rail at a 15-degree angle, and also we spliced it into our fuel line for our other Espar diesel pump, because this van came equipped with the Espar heater that actually heats the block or the antifreeze within the block when it is too cold, and diesels don't like to start in the cold, so that's why they added that heater, basically to preheat the engine. And so luckily we already had a line already run, so we just tapped into that with a Y fitting and brought our diesel heater line off of that line. We decided to change it up a little bit this week and go with kind of a two-part video. So in the first part we went through basically the general overview of what it took to get the heater installed in the van, kind of where we did things, where we put things, and now we're going to get into a little bit more detail of how and why we chose what we did and ended up doing all the steps that we did. We're getting the front seat unbolted. It's an Allen wrench, metric Allen wrench, that there's 6 bolts that hold the front seat in on the tracks, and getting ready to start drilling some holes in the bottom of the van in order to get the heater through. So basically I used the rubber gasket that comes with the heater as a template, as you can see over on the right, to mark where my holes needed to be. I got a 3/4 inch hole saw for the 2 large holes, and then used the appropriate size drill bits to do the smaller 5 holes that are remaining, 1 for the fuel pump and the other 4 for actually mounting the heater. And there was some other holes that were in the floor already from a battery tray that was mounted in. Our van came with an auxiliary house battery that was mounted underneath the front seat. That's why you see the extra wiring there, and there is actually an isolator switch in that compartment as well that we left in order to use the alternator to charge our lithium battery bank that we're going to install in the back once we get farther along in the build. So it turns out my pattern was close but not exactly correct, so I had to use a rat tail file to get the holes moved over slightly to where the actual heater would bolt down and the bolt pattern fit right. So you can see it in the compartment there. And now we're working on getting the heater duct installed. And this is the actual place where the warm air blows out of the heater and into the van. And we decided we didn't want to have to do a crazy long heater run anywhere. We went for simple is better on this approach and basically just put it in the back of the seat. So we got a 2.5 inch hole saw, center punched a hole centered in that little rectangular opening there on to the left side of it, and cut a 2.5 inch hole in that seat compartment. Now it turns out the piece that comes with the Espar heater is actually slightly larger than 2.5 inches. If I had to guess, it's a metric size because everything on this heater is metric, because I think it comes out of Germany. So it would make a little bit of sense, but metric hole saws are something that you don't really find in the United States here very easily, so had to go with the hole saw that I had and ended up doing a lot of filing to get it to fit right. But on the bright side, it worked out to be a really snug fit, and it doesn't wobble around or anything. So we got that in there, and then we started installing our ducting material, and we had to make 2 pretty sharp bends in it to get it to reach the outlet, and then took a razor blade, cut it, and we ended up with basically an S-shaped hose plugged into the end of our heater that is mounted under the front seat. I then came back and installed the 3 screws that hold the little bezel on, and installed the pop-on air diffuser that is what you see when the heater is completely installed. And next, we ended up going under the van to complete the installation. I was basically checking here to make sure that there was no burrs or anything that would prevent the hoses from going up on the heater ports. And we started out by installing the fresh air intake for the combustion air. So one of the beautiful things about this heater is you can actually run it all night long, and as long as your exhaust is ducted out away from the van, which the silver hose there is the exhaust hose, you can not worry about any type of carbon monoxide poisoning, because the combustion chamber is completely sealed off from the heat exchanger. Effectively, it works like a radiator would. So there's a combustion chamber, and then air blows across radiator fins on the other side of that combustion chamber that basically lets the heat go into your van. So you don't have any exhaust fumes going into your van. So I chose to run the exhaust hoses up toward the front of the van. One of the reasons is if the fan or if the heater is running all night long, I would like for the exhaust to come out under my engine and keep the engine warm, because more than likely if the heater's on, it's going to be a little more difficult for the engine to start in the morning because it's a diesel engine. So that'll be one added benefit to having it aimed back up at the front. The other reason that I put it up at the front is because that is the farthest away that I could get it from our bed and from the actual cabin where we will be in. So there's a lot less likely chance that any fumes will get to where we are in the van when we're sleeping. One thing, we are going to have a carbon monoxide detector inside the van just as a safety precaution. I would definitely advise doing that if you have any sort of heater or stove or anything like that that could accidentally get left on or be putting gaseous fumes into the van and you not know it while you're sleeping. So We had to get the hose cut. The heater actually comes with a little muffler too, so it quiets it down when it runs, because it's basically a little diesel engine that's running effectively when you're using the heater. And so in order to get the diesel fuel supply to the heater, we had to tap into one of our fuel lines. Turns out our van came equipped with a Espar, I think it's a D5 diesel heater, and it actually is used to heat the antifreeze up within the block. Basically, it helps the engine start on a really cold morning or a really cold day, really cold night, any time of day. If the temperature is below 37 degrees, when you turn the ignition on, the little diesel heater will kick on, heat up all the antifreeze inside the engine, warm the engine up, and get it ready to start. And so there was already a third fuel line going into the tank, so I didn't have to touch the engine supply or engine return, which I really didn't want to do because the diesel fuel system on these vans, they're kind of finicky, so I didn't really want to have to tap into any of that or mess with any of it. So luckily I was able to stay completely on the non-mission critical fuel line side and not disturb any of the engine fuel lines. So I had to go down to Napa and buy a Y fitting to go into that fuel line because none of the fittings that came in the Espar diesel heater kit were the right line size to make that connection. So went over to Advance, bought a Y fitting and a bunch of clamps to be able to install it into that fuel line that was already there. And then we took our fuel pump and mounted it to a bolt hole that already existed on one of the panels in the body, as you can see here. Just basically took one of the bolts that came in the kit and used it to run it through the body and bolt it on there. And one thing about these pumps is they need to be mounted at a slight angle. I tried to mimic the angle of the one that was already on our van. You can see it there towards the left between the transmission and the fuel lines. And so basically just made that as close of the angle as I could get it, and it worked out where the fuel line needed to be at that angle anyway to clear some stuff that was in the way. So we got that bolt tightened down, got it at the angle that we wanted, and got ready to run the fuel line over to the heater. And now to do that, we had to go over the drive shaft and over the exhaust. Two things where I really wouldn't want my fuel line running over. If I could have put it anywhere else in the van, I would probably have liked to do that, but I didn't want to run 50 feet of fuel line to go all the way to the back of the van and then come all the way back up the other side. Because either way, I would have had to go over the exhaust. It would have just been cooler at the back of the engine versus right at the front. But in the end, ended up going over the heat shroud, so hopefully that will keep enough heat off of the plastic fuel lines. We zip tied it up a bunch and used the metal clips that came with the fuel line in order to fasten it to different places. So now we're getting started with the wiring of the heater, and to do that we had to roll up our floor, which we learned was really nasty underneath. So it took a little time and cleaned up some of that as best I could. And there's actually a electrical chase that runs between the two passenger seats, and this is something T1N Sprinters have it. I'm pretty sure the newer Sprinter models have it. I think pretty much any Mercedes derivative Sprinter like Dodge Frieghtliner in the early years, I guess the ProMaster and the Transit are this probably doesn't apply to those vans. I would have to do some research in order to figure out what's going on with those. But as far as Mercedes vans goes, these have that little passageway there. So basically I fed the wires through there, and then under the driver's seat there's a big rubber boot where it's basically a cable passed through. And so that allowed me to get underneath the van to where the fuel pump is. And so I just cut off the extra line that I pulled through and didn't need. I terminated the end of the wires with the pins and the connector that go with the fuel pump and plugged it into the fuel pump. And as for the rest of the wiring, it actually runs down the other side of the driver's seat, the passenger seat. So we had to take out the step tray there and run it through the hole, similar to where the auxiliary battery cable runs. It's actually the exact same run. So fished the two wires through there. One of those is the power supply wire. The other is the set of wires that controls the thermostat and where you plug the high altitude kit and all of those things into it as well. We didn't have exactly enough wire to get to the back of the van, but we got as far as we could, and we'll have to end up extending it at some point. But what we did is we went up the B-pillar. It's all hidden behind the plastic cover there. Had to fish it through with a fish tape to get the wires up to where I could get to them. It was actually a fairly easy process. I don't know that there's really all that much back there to really get in your way of fishing it through. But that was the cleanest way for us to get the wires back to the back of the van and the path of least resistance, really. So we got those ran, tidied everything up with some electrical tape, started putting everything back together. I taped up the junction where all the wires split out of the main trunk on the heater, so there's no exposed wiring. Even though there's jackets on the wires, I still wanted to tape that up as you would on any type of exposed, or not really, they're not exposed, but just loose wires per se. And so we got the step back installed. It was a little snug with all the wires running behind it, but there is enough room because there was wires going behind it anyways. And on the final step, we got the seat, and we put the seat back in. And we also put in a little bit of Dynamat in there to try to quiet things down a little bit. So that about wraps it up for the process of installing an Espar D2 Diesel heater into our Sprinter van. So if you liked what you saw, hit that thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you drop those below and we'll get back to you. And if you're ready for more, hit that subscribe button and we'll be back next week with another video.